The report, which has not been publicly released but has been seen by SABC News, attributed 5,698 violations to Israel's armed and security forces, 116 to Hamas and 21 to Palestinian Jihad. The report says that the highest number of violations were verified in Israel and the Occupied Palestinian Territories, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Myanmar, Somalia, Nigeria, and in Sudan. The UN verified the killing of 2,267 children, mostly in Gaza, between October 7th and December 31st, but further explained that owing to severe access challenges, particularly in Gaza, that the information presented in the report did not present the full scale of violations against children. The report further states that the Hamas attack on Israel last October and the subsequent military response in Gaza had led to a 155% increase in violations against children. This was the Israeli envoy's reaction to his country's listing for the first time, publicizing a private call with the Secretary General's Chief of Staff, Courtney Rattray, last week.
I am utterly shocked and disgusted by this shameful decision of the Secretary General. Courtney, you know that Israel's army is the most moral army in the world. So this immoral decision will only aid the terrorists and reward Hamas. And I have to tell you another thing. The only one who is blacklisted today is the Secretary General, whose decisions since the war started and even before are rewarding terrorists and incentivizing them to use children for terror acts. And now Hamas will continue even more to use schools and hospitals, because this decision, shameful decision of the Secretary General, will only give Hamas hope to survive and will only extend the war and extend the suffering. Shame on him.
The SG spokesperson then reacted to the airing of that private conversation last Friday.
This is an initiative of member states, more specifically of the Security Council members, who have tasked Secretaries General to report annually on this issue based on well-established methodology. Coming back to this morning's events, earlier today, our Chief of Staff, Courtney Rattray, called the permanent representative of Israel, Gilad Erdan. The call was a courtesy afforded to countries that are newly listed on the annex of the report. It is done to give those countries a heads up and avoid leaks. Ambassador Erdan's video recording of that phone call and the partial release of that recording on Twitter is shocking and unacceptable, and frankly something I've never seen in my 24 years serving this organization.
Overall, the report says the UN verified almost 33,000 grave violations against children in the reporting period, and that while non-state armed groups were responsible for almost 50% of grave violations, government forces were the main perpetrator of the killing and maiming of children, attacks on schools and hospitals, and the denial of humanitarian access. The UN also verified over 1,720 grave violations against children in Sudan, mostly during crossfire between Sudan's armed forces, the Rapid Support Forces, and other armed formations in the country, pointing to 85 attacks on schools and hospitals. In Ukraine, the UN verified 938 grave violations against children, mostly attributed to Russia's armed forces and affiliated groups, with most casualties resulting from explosive weapons with wide area effects. It attributed 249 attacks on schools and hospitals to Russian forces, and 70 such attacks to Ukrainian armed forces. The Secretary General further called on all parties to conflicts to adhere strictly to their obligations under international humanitarian law, notably the principles of distinction and proportionality, and their obligations under international human rights law. The report and its annexes listing all violators will be transmitted to the UN Security Council this week. Sherman Briceby's SABC News, New York.